It's been called antiquated, unfair, and out of touch. Is it time to reform or even abolish the Indian Act? Joining us now to debate that in Dana Point, California, via Skype, Christopher Alcantara, Associate Professor of Politics at Wilfrid Laurier University and the co-author of Beyond the Indian Act, Restoring Aboriginal Property Rights. In Victoria, BC, via Skype, Tobold Rollo. He's a PhD candidate in the Department of Political Science at the University of Toronto. And with us here in studio, Jonathan Kay, columnist with the National Post, and Douglas Anderson, Assistant Professor of Law at the University of Toronto. And it's very nice to see you two guys back here in the studio. And to our friends in Points Beyond, thanks for joining us via Skype, a long way from our studios here at Yonge and Eglinton. I just want to start by putting a few things from a graphic up on the screen here so you can, I guess we can all be on the same page as it relates to the Idle No More protest that we've heard so much about. Here are some of the key concerns from the Idle No More protest. For example, the difficult process for First Nations to lease reserve land, the lack of so-called meaningful dialogue between the Government of Canada and First Nations, the government imposed legislation without adequate consultation, that's what we hear, changes to the Navigable Waterways Protection Act, and, of course, the problematic nature of the Indian Act, more about which we will discuss today. John, I want to start with you because I've been reading your dispatches, and you obviously just got back from a trip at Moose Factory, Fort Albany, Kashechewan, Attawapiskat. Start us off by just telling us about the major concerns that you heard from the people that you spoke to up there. What were they?
It was an interesting trip because from following the Idle No More dialogue, you'd think that it was just a series of complaints against the government, but it's actually not like that at all. There's complaints about the federal government, but there's also a lot of inward-looking thought that's going on up there. I think people there realize that they have to become more independent, that they have to become more commercially successful. They have to do a better job of managing their communities. And you know, these folks are managing the legacy of residential schools and that sort of thing, but the idea that they use the past as an excuse for everything that's wrong with their communities is wrong. It was actually very inspiring. I met a lot of people who really had a self-help attitude, and they are ready to move beyond a lot of the Indian Act solutions that have been imposed on them for generations.
Fair to say not what you expected to hear?
I think a lot of the focus has been on some of the angriest and most militant demonstrators. And a lot of those demonstrators just blame everything on the federal government. But if you go into people's homes, if you talk to just ordinary people on reserves, they have a whole range of views, and they realize that there are a lot of people at fault, and there are a lot of things that they themselves are going to have to do in order to face their challenges.